My name is Thomas Adler. I'm 33. I work in acoustic design, the engineering side, not the creative one. I calculate how sound behaves in enclosed spaces, how it travels, where it gets absorbed, where it reflects back at frequencies that cause problems. Concert halls, recording studios, occasionally offices, where the brief is usually to make it easier for people to not hear each other, which is a different kind of problem. I spend a considerable amount of my professional life thinking about the way things land in a room. What travels? What doesn't? What people hear when they weren't expecting to? This is relevant background information. My flat is on the top floor of a converted Victorian terrace in a part of the city that has been on the verge of becoming fashionable for approximately a decade and has not yet committed to it. The acoustics are good, high ceilings, original cornicing, the kind of walls that were built before anyone started cutting corners on plaster thickness. I had not chosen it for that reason. I had chosen it because it was the right size, and the rent was manageable, and the landlord was the sort who fixed things without requiring you to send 3 follow-up emails. That the acoustics happened to be good was a coincidence I had noted with professional satisfaction and personal amusement. I had lived there for 2 years before the party. Elena Vasquez had lived in the flat below for 18 months of those 2 years. She had introduced herself on a Sunday morning in April, the day after she moved in, by knocking on my door with a plate of something she had baked, which she said was for the building, a general peace offering to any neighbor who received it, and which she handed to me with the directness of a person who is friendly, without being performing friendliness. She was 31. She taught secondary school mathematics, which I mention because it explains something precise about the way she thought. She was comfortable with complexity. She moved through problems without requiring them to be simpler than they were. And she had a very low tolerance for reasoning that didn't hold up. She had dark hair and a quality of attention that was total when she gave it, and completely absent when she didn't, with nothing in between. She wore glasses she pushed up with one finger when she was reading, without looking away from the page. She kept the window of her flat open later into the autumn than seemed advisable, which I knew because the sound carries in that building, and I could hear it close at night. The specific sound of a sash window being pulled down, followed shortly by the click of a lamp. I noticed these things the way I notice acoustic properties, as data, as features of an environment I occupy. I filed them as such, and told myself this was what they were. I was not entirely honest with myself, but I was consistent about it, which is its own kind of discipline. The 18 months before the party had produced a friendship that was real and functional and, from the outside, probably read as uncomplicated. We had each other's numbers. We borrowed things. Her, a drill. Me, a blender she owned and I only occasionally needed. We had eaten together 7 or 8 times, the casual kind that begins as splitting leftovers on the landing and becomes 2 hours at a kitchen table without anyone having planned it. She came to me when her school department had a data organization problem that turned out to be an Excel issue, and I came to her when I was drafting a proposal and needed someone to tell me if the argument held up, which she did without softening the parts that didn't. She was the person I told things to before I'd finished deciding what I thought about them. I had noticed this in month 6 and treated it as a feature of the friendship. I had continued treating it as a feature of the friendship for 12 months after that, with increasing effort and decreasing conviction. The party was not planned as a significant event. A birthday, mine, 33, not a round number, not a milestone by any metric I recognized. A group of people I had known across different periods of my life assembled in the high-ceilinged flat on a Saturday in November. I had cooked too much food, as I always do, and bought more wine than the guest list required. And I had put together a playlist I spent more time on than I would admit to anyone, including myself. Alina had offered to come early and help. I had said it was fine. I had it covered. She had come early anyway and helped, which I had expected, and which had made the 2 hours before anyone else arrived feel like the best part of the evening, which I had not expected, and immediately declined to examine. The guests arrived in the pattern that guests always arrive, the punctual ones first, which produced a slightly formal first hour. Then the comfortable middle wave that makes a party feel like a party. Then the late arrivals who assume the evening is warmed up without them, which it had. By 9 o'clock the flat was full at a level I had not entirely anticipated, which was good. There is an acoustic phenomenon I have always found interesting, the way a room with the right number of people in it reaches a kind of resonant hum, a frequency produced by overlapping conversation that becomes almost a single sound. My flat reached it by 9:15. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment and simply listened to it. Elena was across the room, talking to my colleague Petra, with the focused quality she has when she finds a conversation genuinely interesting. She was wearing something dark with a wide collar, and she had her glasses on, which she sometimes didn't in social settings. And she had a glass of wine she had barely touched, because she rarely drinks more than the first glass. I watched her disagree with something Petra said. I could tell from the slight tilt of her head and the way her hands came up, not aggressively, just as part of the argument. And I thought, she is so entirely herself. Always, in every room she is in. I went back to the kitchen and did something useful. I have a long record of going back to the kitchen and doing something useful at exactly this kind of moment. It is a coping strategy with a very poor long-term return on investment, and I am aware of this. The leaving began at 9:45, when the first couple cited a babysitter. This is the correct first domino. Once one couple with a babysitter leaves, the rest of the evening has a direction. By 10:15, the flat had thinned considerably. By 10:30, the door had closed behind Marcus, who had insisted on helping me stack the dishwasher with the particular efficiency of a person who is simultaneously being helpful and leaving. And I did the calculation I mentioned at the beginning. Alina was in the sitting room, gathering glasses from the side table near the bookshelf. She was not moving toward her coat. She did not look like a person who was about to move toward her coat. She looked like a person who had decided something and was waiting for the right moment to be in the same room as me without 12 other people in it. I am an acoustic engineer. I understand how sound behaves in the spaces between things. I had been aware, for considerably longer than I had acknowledged, that there was a particular quality to the silence that Elena produced when she was deciding whether to say something. It had a texture. It was different from the silence she produced when she had nothing to say. I had catalogued this difference and done nothing with it for the better part of a year. I went to the kitchen. She followed me. She put 3 glasses on the counter. I was running water into the sink. The flat was very quiet now, the resonant hum gone, replaced by the specific silence of a space that has recently held a lot of people and is in the process of returning to itself. The heating was making a small sound in the pipes. The playlist had ended. She said my name, Thomas, not differently yet. Still the same word she had been saying for 18 months. But she had said it to stop me. I had been about to say something about the dishes, something procedural and entirely beside the point. And when I turned and looked at her, she said it again. And that was the one that was different. I have thought since about how to explain what different meant. It was not volume or pitch. It was not slower. Acoustically, if I had recorded both versions, the waveforms would have been nearly identical. The difference was not in the signal. It was in what was behind it. The first was a word. The second was the thing the word had been standing in for all this time, finally allowed to be itself. She was standing on the other side of the kitchen island. She had her hands flat on the counter. Her glasses were slightly pushed up, the reading position, except she wasn't reading anything. She said, "I was going to leave with everyone else." I said, "I know." She said, "I didn't." I said, "I know." She looked at me with the full attention she gives to things when she has decided they are worth the full attention. She said, "I've been watching you go back to the kitchen all evening." I said, "That's an accurate observation." She said, "You go to the kitchen when there's something you're not saying." I said, "Nothing." She said, "I do the same thing. Different room. Same instinct." She paused. "Mine is usually the window. I go and look at something outside and think about what I would say if I were a person who said it." I said, "Are you a person who says it tonight?" She looked at me for a long time. The heating ticked in the pipes. Outside, a car went past on the street below, and the sound of it rose and faded in the specific way it does through Victorian sash windows. There, and then cleanly absent. She said, "I almost left with everyone else because it would have been easier to just go home and put the kettle on and go to sleep and continue the way we've been continuing." She said the last part with a precision that made clear it was a verdict. I have been very comfortable with how things are for a long time. I have also known, for most of that time, that comfortable was not the right word for what things are. I said, "No." She said, "What's the right word?" I said, "I'm not sure I have one word." She said, "Try." I turned off the tap. The sound of water went away. The flat was very quiet. I said, "You're the first person I want to tell things to. Not after I've decided what I think. Before, when it's still uncertain. I only want to tell you things before they're resolved, because you're the only person I trust with the unresolved version." I stopped. That's not a feature of a friendship. I've been calling it that for a year, and it hasn't been that for a year. She said, "Longer than a year." I said, "Yes." She said, "For me too." She said it the way she says things she has already examined and confirmed, and is now simply reporting, not tentative, not performing uncertainty, just the result of the assessment. I said, "I kept thinking it would complicate things." She said, "It will complicate things." I said, "Yes." She said, "I've been doing the mathematics on that for 8 months. The version where I don't say anything is not actually simpler. It just feels simpler because nothing changes. But nothing changing is also a cost." She looked at her hands on the counter. "I'm a maths teacher. I know a sunk cost when I'm paying one. I do not have reliable instincts in the vicinity of Elena Vasquez." I was aware of this and making a note of it for future reference. She had not moved from the other side of the island. Neither had I. There was approximately 4 feet of kitchen between us, which is not a large distance in absolute terms, and had never felt larger. I said, "What would you have said if you were a person who said it?" She looked up. She said, "I would have said that I moved into the flat below yours, and I thought you were reserved, and I thought I wouldn't know you very well. And then I knocked on your door to return a drill, and you had put on a record while you were working, something old and instrumental, and you turned it down when you answered, and then turned it back up after I left. And I stood in the stairwell and listened to it come through the ceiling for 4 minutes before I went downstairs." She paused. "And I would have said, I've been listening to what comes through the ceiling for 18 months, and I know the shape of your day by the sounds of it, and that is not normal neighbor behavior, and I have been aware of this for some time." I said, "Which record was it?" She said, "I looked it up later. Bill Evans. Waltz for Debbie." I said, "You looked it up." She said, "I looked it up. There is a specific acoustic principle called the precedence effect. which describes the way that when two identical sounds reach the ear at slightly different times, the brain attributes them to a single source, the first one. The second is absorbed into the first, made part of it, heard as one thing rather than two. I had thought about this at various points over 18 months in the context of Elena and me. The degree to which her presence had become so woven into the pattern of my days that I could no longer clearly separate it from the rest. The sounds through the ceiling, the light under her door at night, the knock on the stairwell that I had started, somewhere around month 6, to simply expect. I walked around the kitchen island. She stayed where she was. She watched me come around it, and she did not step back, and she did not look away, and when I was close enough she lifted her chin in the particular way she has of meeting things directly. I said, "Can I?" She said, "Yes." I put my hand against her jaw, carefully, the way you handle something you have wanted to handle correctly for a long time. She closed her eyes. I kissed her once, and it was quiet. And it was the most honest thing I had done in a very long time. When we stepped back, she let out a breath that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh, and was in fact exactly the sound of a person releasing something they had been holding at careful distance for too long. She said, "The dishes can wait." I said, "The dishes can absolutely wait." She laughed, the real one, sudden and unguarded, which I had heard through the ceiling in various configurations for 18 months, and had never heard this close before. It sounded different, near, fuller. The high ceiling caught it and held it for a moment before it faded. She looked around at the flat. The glasses still on the side table, the coats on the hooks by the door, the remains of an evening that had held other people and now held only us. She looked like a person who has made a decision and is noting with some satisfaction that the decision appears to be correct. She said, "Put the record on." I put the record on. She was in the flat below for another 4 months after that evening, which is about the length of time it takes to decide what you are deciding and then handle the practical aspects sensibly. She moved upstairs in March, which she described as the logical conclusion of a process she had been running the numbers on since approximately November. The click of the sash window going down at night was now in the same room as me, which was an adjustment of the best kind. The flat below was let to a young architect who kept reasonable hours and had not yet discovered that the building's acoustics were as good as they were. I chose not to mention it. Some things are better found out for yourself, in your own time, by simply being somewhere long enough to start listening. Elena still pushed her glasses up with one finger when she was reading. She still had the total, absolute quality of attention when she gave it, and still gave it entirely when she decided something was worth it. She had brought the mathematics to our life in ways that were occasionally humbling. Her capacity for assessing what something actually cost versus what it felt like it cost had revised several of my long-standing operating assumptions. I was better at this now than I had been. She said I had always been better at it than I thought. I had simply been applying it to the wrong variable. She was, in all probability, correct. She usually is. Years later, when people ask how it started, I tell them about the kitchen. About a party that had emptied out by 10:30, and a woman who had not moved toward her coat, and a name said twice in the same room with 2 entirely different meanings. Elena tells it differently. She starts with the stairwell, with standing outside my door, listening to a record through the ceiling, which is the version where it began earlier and neither of us knew. Both versions are true. The question of which one is the start depends on what you're measuring and where you decide the distance begins. What I know is this: sound is not just what you transmit. It's what the room does with it. what it carries, what it absorbs, what it gives back when everything else has gone quiet, and there are only two people left in a space, and one of them finally says the word they have been meaning for a long time. I design rooms for a living. I think about what they do to what travels through them. I was not prepared for what mine did that night. I am very glad I wasn't. What would you have done if everyone else left and you realized the person you'd been careful around was suddenly the only one still there? And have you ever heard someone say your name and known, before they'd said another word, that something had changed? Tell me in the comments. If this one stayed with you, a like and a subscribe means I'll keep making them, and I'll see you in the next one.